Just curious. What device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
It's strange how something as simple as a photo can rip you wide open, like a paper cut you don't notice until you're already bleeding. It was the morning after Christmas, December 26th, 7:30 in the morning. I hadn't even poured my coffee yet. My phone buzzed with a notification, and there it was, grinning at me from the screen like some kind of inside joke I was never meant to get. The Carlson family Christmas photo. Same perfect fireplace backdrop. Same ugly sweaters they all pretend to hate but wear every single year, like it's a costume for some twisted holiday play. Same damn captions, too. Family is everything. Grateful for the ones who matter most. Only this time, for the third year in a row, I wasn't in the picture. Not even a mention. Not even a missed you, Mom, or a lazy tag in the comments. It was like I never existed at all. And I don't mean they forgot to invite me. I mean, they knew I was at home. They knew I had baked 3 pies, wrapped their presents, even bought the dog a ridiculous reindeer hat because Emily said it'd be cute for the pictures. And then they went to Rick's sister Patricia's house, took the family photo without me, again, and posted it like I was just some neighbor they barely remembered. Not a wife, not a mother, not the woman who held this whole goddamn family together for over 30 years. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. The slow fade, the way a family stops talking to you in words and starts talking to you in absences. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in, little by little. A snide comment here, a missing invite there, until you wake up one day and realize they've all decided the story moves on better without you in it. But this year it hit different. Because this year I didn't cry. I didn't slam a door. I didn't call anyone begging for an explanation I'd already memorized. We thought you'd be tired, or we figured you'd want a quiet night. Or the always reliable, oh, we didn't realize the timing had changed. No, this year I just stared at that stupid photo and whispered to myself, they want me out of the picture? Fine. But they forgot one thing. I still own the damn frame. It's funny how power shifts. All those years I bent over backwards, trying to make everyone happy, working 2 jobs when Rick's business nearly tanked after the recession, staying up late to help Emily finish her college essays while Rick snored in front of the TV covering for Tyler's dumb mistakes, like when he totaled his first car, and blamed it on a deer. Spoiler, there was no deer. And the reward for all of that? Becoming invisible. Hell, being invisible would have been a step up. They edited me out like a bad take in a movie they already wrapped. So I decided I'm done playing nice. I'm done explaining myself to people who don't even bother asking the questions. I'm done begging for a seat at a table I built with my own 2 hands. And if they want to put on a show for the town every December, then it's high time someone gave them a performance they'll never forget. Because here's the thing they forgot. I might not be good at confrontation, but I'm damn good at telling a story. And if they want to keep pretending I was never there, then I'm going to give them something too big, too loud, and way too bold to ignore. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your family wasn't just neglecting you? They were actively rewriting the narrative to erase you. Like they were photoshopping your soul out of every memory just because it made their picture prettier? And did you stay quiet? Or did you finally one day decide that silence was just another way of giving them permission? I spent 30 years of my life thinking that patience was love, that forgiveness was strength, that keeping the peace was more important than speaking the truth. But standing there, phone in hand, staring at that photo like it was some kind of glossy obituary to the woman I used to be, I realized something. Peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes peace is loud. Sometimes peace is a billboard that says, screw your curated image. Here's the real story. And so I did it. I made the call. It wasn't dramatic. Just a simple, calm call to a local print shop that also handled billboard advertisements. I asked to speak to someone in design, said I had an idea for a holiday message. They connected me to a young guy named Max, who sounded maybe 19, barely old enough to remember a time before smartphones. He said they had space available near downtown, just off Route 17. across from the diner where Rick eats his Thursday lunch with the same 3 guys he's been complaining about for 15 years. Perfect. I didn't tell Max everything yet. Just said I had a message I wanted the world to see, a little Christmas note. And when he asked what I wanted it to say, I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in months, and told him I'd get back to him with the final copy soon. Because if they think the story's over, they've got another thing coming. And this time, it's printed 40 feet high, in full color, with my name on it. If someone had asked me 10 years ago whether I thought my family would one day stop including me in their traditions, or start treating me like an afterthought in the story of their lives, I would have laughed it off and said something naive like, "Oh, my kids love me too much," or "Rick and I have been through too much together to ever let that happen." Because back then I still believed that love, real love, the kind built on shared memories and quiet sacrifices, was enough to keep people tethered to each other no matter how far they drifted in the daily grind of aging and obligation. But the truth is, distance doesn't always come with a dramatic slam of the door or some screaming match that signals the end of an era. Sometimes it creeps in so slowly, so quietly, that you don't even realize how far gone you are until you're standing at the edge of something that used to feel like home and realizing the door's been locked behind you for a while now. It didn't start with the photo. No, the photo was just the Billboard-worthy climax of something much older and uglier. It started with a shrug here, a passive comment there, small enough that at first I brushed it off as stress or busyness, or just life happening in its messy, relentless way. Like the year Tyler forgot my birthday, not forgot to call late in the day, not forgot to buy a gift, but fully and completely forgot. Until 2 weeks later when I brought it up and he stared at me like I was speaking another language, then muttered something about work being crazy. Or the way Emily started calling Rick directly when she needed advice, legal stuff, money stuff, even things about her car, like I hadn't been the one who taught her how to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning, while Rick was too busy dealing with some client crisis to be bothered. And Rick didn't need to say anything at all. The way he slowly began managing things without asking, changing the thermostat setting like it wasn't my house too, buying new furniture and telling me after the fact, locking me out of bank conversations because it's easier if I just handle it. It was all part of this long, cold campaign to remind me, in 1,000 little ways, that I was no longer central, no longer needed, just a background figure with a casserole and a polite smile. And you know what the worst part is? I let it happen. I let it happen because I believed that's what strong women do. We don't make a fuss. We pick our battles. We swallow the lump in our throat and tell ourselves they'll come around, that it's just a phase, that kids grow up and pull away, that husbands get distant but always come back. But there's a difference between space and exile. And by the time I realized I'd been exiled from my own family, the invitation to return had already been rescinded. Christmas 2 years ago was the first slap. I'd spent the whole week preparing, cleaning the house, baking cookies, making sure the gifts were wrapped just right, with those stupid gold ribbons Emily likes, and the handmade tags I always pretended I didn't spend too much time on. The night before, Rick casually mentioned that we'd switch things up this year and take the family photo at Patricia's house, since she had the big tree and everyone was going to be there anyway. I asked, should I bring the pies there instead? And he gave me this look, this quick, impatient flicker that said I was being annoying just by asking, and said, we'll see how it plays out. They never called, never texted. I waited stupidly until almost 10 that night before I checked Facebook and saw the photo, smiling faces, matching sweaters, and no room for me. I was devastated, of course, but I told myself it was a one-time thing, that something must have come up, that it was a fluke. That was the lie I clung to, right up until they did it again the following year, with the same pose, the same tree, and the same absence where I used to be. This year, when it happened again, I didn't feel sad. I felt surgical, like a part of me had been waiting for confirmation that what I suspected all along was true. They didn't forget me. They erased me on purpose because it made their lives easier, cleaner, less complicated. I was the grit in their family filter, the one who'd seen too much and asked too many questions and refused to play along with their fantasy that everything was perfect. So they wrote me out. And this year, when they posted that picture, again without me, I finally understood that being quiet, being patient, being the better person had only made it easier for them to push me further away. And that's when the idea came. I don't know exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was the cruel symmetry of seeing the same image for the third year running, like a bad sequel that just keeps getting made. Maybe it was the smug way Patricia captioned it, grateful for real family, as if I hadn't hosted her kids every other Thanksgiving for a decade. Or maybe it was just something inside me that finally cracked. But whatever it was, I suddenly saw it all so clearly. I wasn't going to fight them with angry texts or emotional appeals, wasn't going to cry or beg or guilt trip them into letting me back into a picture I no longer even wanted to be part of. No, this time, I was going to fight back on my terms. Not with noise, but with spectacle. And the first step was calling Max, the designer from the print shop, to tell him that I was ready to make my Christmas message very, very public. Because if my family was going to treat me like I was invisible, then I was going to remind them, in the loudest, boldest, most undeniable way possible, that I had been there all along, and I wasn't going anywhere. By the time I drove to the print shop the following morning, something inside me had already shifted, not just in the way you'd expect, not simply in that exhausted, rage-fueled way where hurt turns to fury, and fury turns into some messy outburst you regret later, but in a colder, clearer, more deliberate sense of knowing that, for the first time in decades, I was about to do something entirely for myself, not to please, not to smooth things over, not to earn back some imaginary approval, but to mark the line in the sand between who I had been and who I was about to become. I pulled into the parking lot just as the fog was lifting off the pavement, a gray December mist clinging to everything like old secrets. And when I walked inside, I didn't feel nervous or uncertain. I felt ready, like the kind of woman who wasn't there to ask permission anymore. Max, the designer, couldn't have been more than 20, a string bean of a kid with half-dyed hair and a smile that seemed both apologetic and over-caffeinated at the same time. The kind of person who probably thought my generation was made up of nothing but people yelling about email and chain restaurants. But to his credit, he didn't blink when I told him I wanted to design a billboard for a Christmas message that wasn't exactly traditional. He just leaned forward across the counter, clicked a few tabs open on his laptop, and said, "All right, what kind of vibe are we going for?" And that's when I realized I didn't just want to be seen. I wanted to be undeniable. We sat for over 2 hours, going back and forth about colors, fonts, and layout, laughing more than I expected. Because as it turns out, nothing bonds two strangers like plotting a little tasteful vengeance in Helvetica bold. I told him my idea, not just the text, though that came later, but the feeling behind it. The way you can live your whole life in the margins of someone else's story, until one day you realize that you were the glue all along, the scaffolding holding up the picture frame, while everyone else smiled for the camera. Max listened without interrupting, occasionally scribbling something in his notebook, nodding thoughtfully like he actually got it, which honestly made me want to hug him and cry at the same time, though I didn't do either. The message had to be sharp, but not cruel, personal, but universal. Something that would make Rick's jaw tighten and Patricia's blood pressure spike, sure, but also something that every other woman who'd ever felt erased or overlooked or rewritten could read and feel that electric jolt of recognition, like someone had finally put words to the hollow ache that had been growing inside them for years. And that's how I landed on the final line. Simple, elegant, and impossible to ignore. I may not be in the picture, but I own the frame. It was Max who suggested the Christmas border, a stylized gold picture frame around the message with subtle holiday accents, red ribbon, a few pine cones, just enough cheer to keep it looking festive, not bitter. The background was a muted pine green, the kind you see in vintage postcards, and the font was clean and modern, centered on the board like a declaration, like a line drawn in snow that no one could pretend not to see. We previewed it on his screen, and when he clicked zoom, I felt my breath catch, because there it was, 40 feet wide, towering, unapologetic, and so gloriously unignorable that I actually laughed out loud. "I love it," I said, and I meant it. Not just the design, but the act of it. The rebellion of claiming space in a world that had tried to squeeze me out. The victory of choosing visibility, not just in a photo, but in the town itself, for everyone to see, including the people who'd spent the last 3 years pretending I was some ghost that only showed up to cook and clean and disappear quietly. Max hit print. I paid in cash. I signed the release form with a flourish I hadn't used in years, like my signature finally meant something again. The billboard would be live by Friday morning, 2 days before New Year's, right in time for every single person in town to see it on their post-holiday grocery runs and weekend drives and coffee detours. As I walked out into the cold, the sky was hanging low with snow clouds, that heavy, silent kind of gray that makes everything feel suspended, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel heavy too. I felt light, almost giddy, like I had just told the universe, "I see you, now see me." I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the wind sting my cheeks, and when I pulled into the driveway, I didn't even glance at the Christmas decorations still flickering half-heartedly around the porch. I didn't feel sad, I didn't feel petty, I felt in control. And of course, the photo was still there, still racking up likes and so beautiful comments from people who didn't know a damn thing. Patricia had even changed her cover photo to it, like it was some magazine shoot and not a carefully orchestrated piece of fiction. But I didn't comment, I didn't message, I didn't reach out. I waited. Because I knew something they didn't. The real picture was about to drop, and no one was going to scroll past this one. There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a small town when something truly unexpected happens. Not the kind of unexpected like a pothole swallowing a minivan, or the corner bakery burning down because someone left the cinnamon rolls in too long, but the kind of unexpected that feels like someone took the polite little curtain everyone agrees to pretend is a wall and tore it clean off its hinges, exposing the fragile, messy truth beneath everyone's curated smiles and mutual winks. And that was exactly the kind of silence that settled over Fairview the morning my billboard went up, stretching long and slow like the pause between a slap and a scream. I didn't go to see it right away. I wanted it to live in their eyes first, in the eyes of the people who always waved to me with those too wide, too fake smiles at the grocery store. The same people who called Rick such a great guy and told me I was so lucky to have such a stable family, as if what they saw from the sidewalk was the full story, and not just the glossy brochure version we'd been handing out for decades. So instead of driving straight to Route 17 that morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the town's reaction arrive in waves, first through texts, then calls, then those half-sincere, half-mortified Facebook comments that tried to sound neutral but couldn't quite hide the shock laced between the exclamation points and emojis. Patricia was the first to break the silence, which wasn't surprising because she's never been able to resist putting her polished little fingerprints on anything that threatens her self-image. She didn't mention me by name, of course. That would have been too direct, too honest. But she posted one of those passive-aggressive status updates she's famous for, the kind designed to wound without incriminating herself. Some people crave attention more than connection, sad to see what the holidays bring out in folks, praying for peace in the new year. The comments poured in, "Stay strong, Pat. You're such a class act. Don't let the negativity steal your shine," as if she were the victim of a natural disaster and not the architect of her own petty little empire. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My message was already 30 feet high and impossible to miss. By noon, Rick's phone had rung so many times he finally turned it off, which for a man who treats his cell like an extra limb was about as subtle as a flare gun. I knew he'd seen it. He always takes that road to get to the hardware store, and besides, there's no way someone like him, Someone so obsessed with appearances and control and his standing in the community, hadn't gotten 5 calls before breakfast from his Thursday lunch crew or the guys at Rotary. I imagined his face when he saw it, the twitch in his jaw, the way his nostrils flare just before he launches into one of his condescending monologues. That measured tone he uses when he's trying to sound calm, but is actually seething. I imagined it, and for the first time in a very long time, I smiled without bitterness. The texts started coming in around 2. Emily was first, predictably dramatic, completely blind to the irony of her own self-righteousness. "Mom, what the hell did you do? You're embarrassing all of us." No greeting, no attempt to understand, just straight to damage control. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the message and setting my phone face down. Tyler's came later, shorter, colder. "This is low, even for you." I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable, so perfectly emblematic of how far gone we really were. For a boy I used to rock to sleep with lullabies and lavender oil, he sure had a gift for forgetting who loved him first. But the real show didn't start until I went out in public. It wasn't even anything big. I just needed milk. But when I walked into the grocery store, the air around me changed, not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way, but in the subtle, sticky way people's eyes lingered just a beat too long, their mouths twitched like they're holding back opinions they've been dying to say for years. I could feel the attention, like static in the air, every glance a mixture of disbelief and admiration, judgment and curiosity. A woman I barely knew from PTA years ago whispered, "Was that really you?" as I walked past the cereal aisle. I nodded. She paused, blinked, then said, "Good for you," with a kind of reverence usually reserved for people who win lotteries or survive bad marriages. And the thing is, not everyone disapproved. For every whisper and side-eye, there was a quiet nod, a knowing look from someone who didn't have the words but felt the truth in her bones. I even had a cashier lean in and say, "Honestly, iconic," as she rang up my eggs, and though I didn't respond, just smiled and took my bag. I felt something warm in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Validation, not from the people who hurt me, but from strangers who recognized the shape of that hurt. By the time I got home, the silence inside the house was thick with expectation. Rick was there, waiting, not pacing, not yelling, just sitting in his chair with that stoic posture that he thinks makes him look noble but actually just makes him look like he's about to fire someone. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me like I was a puzzle he didn't know how to solve anymore. Then finally he said it. "We need to talk, now." And in that moment, I knew the billboard wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. When Rick said we need to talk, there was a weight in his voice that tried to echo authority, the kind of tone he used to use when the kids were small and he wanted to sound like the final word in the room, the unshakable decision-maker who never asked but always told. And for years, I let that tone settle over our lives like some unspoken contract. We both knew who had the power, and even when I didn't agree, I let him carry on with the illusion that he was the one steering, the one protecting, the one sacrificing, when in truth it was me, always me, holding everything together in ways that didn't make it into the holiday cards or dinner table toasts. So when he used that voice on me now, sitting there in our living room like a man about to issue a corporate memo, I didn't flinch, didn't sit down, didn't even ask what he wanted. Because I already knew what was coming and I was tired. Tired of being handled. Tired of being blamed. Tired of carrying the weight of a silence that had already fractured into 1,000 unsaid things. Emily arrived first, driving up in her spotless leased SUV like someone rushing to manage a crisis. Except the crisis wasn't real in her world. Until it impacted her image. Until it threatened the careful branding she'd built for herself as the level-headed daughter with the perfect hair, and the reasonable opinions, and the charming boyfriend who definitely didn't know. Her mother had been edited out of family life, like a coffee stain on a white shirt. She walked in, eyes scanning the room like a courtroom, calculating every move, and I could see it in her face before she even opened her mouth. That tight-lipped expression of controlled outrage, the kind that says, "I love you, but you're making it really hard," as if love was some performance I had failed to rehearse correctly. Then came Tyler, late as always, half apologetic, half distracted, with the same hollowed-out gaze that had become his default over the past few years, a gaze that told me more about his loyalties than any of the brief, passive text messages he sent on birthdays or holidays. He didn't hug me, didn't meet my eyes, just stood in the corner like he was waiting for this to be over, like he already had somewhere better to be, which was funny, considering I used to rearrange entire weekends just to make sure he had what he needed. Rides, cash, reassurance, whatever version of mothering he happened to require that day. When they were all there, Rick cleared his throat and launched into what I can only describe as a corporate intervention, like he'd drafted talking points in the car, bullet points of disappointment hidden behind platitudes about what's best for the family. He started with the word disruption, which nearly made me laugh, because apparently my 40-foot message had disrupted the family dynamic, as though it hadn't already been broken for years, just neatly papered over with birthday cakes and forced smiles. He said I had humiliated him publicly, that I'd undermined the family's unity, and that there were better ways to handle disagreements. I listened quietly, which they all interpreted as submission, but in reality, I was just waiting for them to get it all out, every last performative ounce of their collective outrage, because I needed them to hear what I was going to say without interruption. When Emily jumped in, her voice was sharper, more emotional. She accused me of being vindictive, of turning the town against them, of damaging her professional reputation by association, as though her clients would walk away simply because her mother had finally said something out loud. She said, "This isn't you, Mom," and I stared at her so long she looked away, because the truth was, she had no idea who I was anymore. She knew the version of me that showed up on time, that baked cookies, that bit her tongue through insults disguised as jokes, but she didn't know this version, the one who'd finally looked in the mirror and said, "No more." Tyler said little, but when he did speak, it was the final cut. "You've changed." And that was it. That was the moment everything crystallized. Because yes, I had changed. I had changed from someone who waited to be invited to someone who built her own goddamn door. I had changed from someone who asked for space at the table to someone who pulled the tablecloth out from under their performance and dared them to notice what spilled. I had changed from a mother who whispered apologies for being too much, too loud, too emotional, to a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. So I stood up. I looked at all three of them, my husband, my daughter, my son, and I said the one thing I should have said years ago. You didn't forget me. You chose to remove me because it made your lives easier. Because I was the reminder that love takes work, that loyalty isn't automatic, that family isn't something you display when it's convenient and discard when it complicates the image. You wanted peace, but only if it meant I stayed silent. You wanted harmony, but only if it meant I kept folding in on myself. Well, I'm done folding. The room went still. No one spoke. Rick said something about legal repercussions, how I might have violated some kind of slander rule, how people in town were talking, how the business might suffer, and I laughed, a long, exhausted laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so on brand for him to reduce decades of marriage and motherhood and quiet sacrifice into a public relations concern. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked out. Later that evening, I drove to Route 17 and parked across from the Billboard, just as the sun was setting behind it, casting that brilliant gold light that made the whole thing look almost holy. A woman I didn't recognize, late 40s maybe, in jeans and a sweatshirt, was standing nearby, staring up at it. She turned to me as I approached and said, without preamble, "That was brave." And in that moment, I didn't feel like a villain or a victim. I felt like a woman who had finally told the truth. They don't have to like me, they don't even have to speak to me, but they'll never erase me again.